Imagine this: a king who ruled one of the most powerful empires in the world, a king whose armies stretched across continents, whose ships carried silver from the New World, whose crown gleamed with centuries of power. And yet, this same king would spend his nights in darkness, trembling before a painting, not a battle map, not a sacred image of Christ, not even the portraits of his ancestors that lined the gilded walls of Madrid's royal palace, but a single portrait of himself. A portrait so disturbing, so grotesque, that it was hidden away from the public. A painting whispered about in secret, letters, feared by courtiers and guarded like a state weapon, because those who saw it claimed it revealed something unnatural, a truth about the king's body, a curse upon his mind, a reflection of the dynasty's downfall. And for the king, it became an obsession. He locked himself away with it for hours. He prayed before it, screamed at it, wept before it, until the portrait no longer looked like paint and canvas, but like a mirror that showed him his own damnation. This isn't just the story of art. It is the story of Charles II of Spain, a monarch so deformed by centuries of inbreeding that his very face became a symbol of decay. A king who believed he was bewitched, who underwent exorcisms while sitting on the throne, who left behind a body that shocked his doctors at autopsy. And at the center of his unraveling was a painting. This is the forbidden portrait that drove a king to madness. To understand why this painting mattered, we must go back to the birth of Charles II. The Spanish Habsburg dynasty was, by the 1600s, already cursed. For 2 centuries, they had married within their own bloodline, cousins marrying cousins, uncles marrying nieces. The logic was simple: keep power concentrated, keep the dynasty pure. But biology does not forgive arrogance. By the 1660s, the family tree had collapsed into itself. Historians today can map it. Charles's mother was also his father's niece. His grandmother was also his aunt. His entire ancestry folded back in a closed circle. The result was catastrophic. Charles was born in Madrid on November 6, 1661. Even at birth, doctors whispered he was unlucky. He was frail, sickly, his skin ghostly pale. By age 4, when most children run and shout, Charles could barely stand. His legs were weak. His head, too large for his body, lolled to one side. The infamous Habsburg jaw dominated his face. So extreme was the deformity that he could not fully close his mouth, nor chew food properly. Chroniclers noted he often swallowed meals whole, leading to constant digestive illness. Worse still, his tongue was so swollen that speech was a struggle. Foreign ambassadors frequently wrote that the boy king could barely be understood. One physician's report in the Spanish court records reads, "His body is feeble, his intellect slow, and his visage most unsightly. He cannot eat without difficulty, nor speak without stammering. His education was equally stunted. Tutors complained that Charles had the mind of a child well into his teenage years. He struggled with reading, and when frustrated, would erupt in sudden fits of rage. But at the age of 4, after the death of his father, Charles was proclaimed King of Spain. Think about that for a moment. A boy who could not chew his food properly now ruled one of the largest empires on earth. Spain, already weakened by wars, debt, and plague, would now be led by a fragile child. And so, in order to mask the truth, the royal court turned to propaganda. Royal portraits were never just paintings. They were weapons. In an age before photography, before newspapers could circulate images, the way a king appeared on canvas was how the world understood him. Think of Henry VIII painted by Hans Holbein. Broad, shoulders, towering frame, power radiating from every detail. The real Henry may have been aging, diseased and limping, but on canvas he looked invincible. For Charles II, this was essential. His physical presence in court was underwhelming. He was small, frail, hunched. He often drooled. His speech was nearly incomprehensible. But on canvas, he could be anything. Artists like Juan Carreño de Miranda and Claudio Coello were summoned to immortalize him. They painted him in gleaming armor, hand resting on the hilt of a sword, or robed in the splendor of Spanish kingship. These portraits were sent abroad, to France, to Vienna, to Rome, reminders that Spain still had a monarch of dignity and strength. But behind closed doors, something else was painted. A portrait not for foreign eyes, not for courtiers, but for the king himself. This was the forbidden portrait. Accounts differ on who painted it. Some point to Claudio Coello. Others suggest it was an anonymous court painter tasked with capturing the king's true likeness. Whatever the case, the result was horrifying. Unlike the official portraits, this one did not flatter. It did not smooth the skin or strengthen the jaw. It did not disguise the weakness of his body. It revealed Charles as he truly was. Gaunt, sickly, deformed. His eyes sunken, his skin pallid, his jaw jutting grotesquely forward. A French ambassador who later described it in a letter wrote, "The image of His Majesty was more corpse than sovereign, so dreadful in aspect that it inspires fear in the beholder." This painting was not displayed in the great halls of Madrid. It was hidden away, locked in a private chamber. But Charles demanded to see it. At first, it seemed like curiosity. The young king would ask his attendants to bring the painting to his private rooms. He would sit in silence, staring at it. But soon, it became obsession. Night after night, Charles locked himself away with the portrait. Servants reported that he muttered prayers before it, as though confessing to a priest. Other times he screamed at it, his voice echoing through the palace halls. One court chronicler noted, "The king speaks to the image as though it were alive, calling it demon and ghost, and none dare approach him at these hours." The painting became a mirror of his deepest fears. He was haunted by the belief that he was cursed. He spoke often of witchcraft. Priests reported that Charles complained of being hexed, that spells had been cast upon his body to render him impotent, sickly, and mad. Every symptom, every deformity, every seizure he blamed on sorcery, and the portrait seemed to confirm it. Staring into that grotesque likeness, Charles saw not just a man, but a monster. From this point forward, his behavior spiraled. He refused to bathe, claiming water weakened him. He suffered convulsions and hallucinations. He became paranoid of those around him, accusing ministers, even family, of trying to poison him. But it gets worse. By the 1690s, Charles's mental and physical collapse was undeniable. Spain's ambassadors sent desperate letters abroad describing his condition. A Venetian diplomat wrote, "The king is more spectre than man, trembling, vacant-eyed, and muttering of demons. The court is governed by priests and doctors, none of whom can save him." The solution? Exorcism. Yes, the most powerful monarch in Spain submitted to multiple exorcisms while still ruling. In 1698, Charles underwent one particularly infamous ritual. Priests forced him to kneel before relics of saints. They read aloud passages of scripture while commanding any demons within him to depart. The king convulsed violently. He vomited. He screamed that invisible hands clawed at him. At one point, he fainted entirely. Chroniclers recorded the scene with awe and terror. Some swore that shadows moved across the walls. Others whispered that the portrait itself shook in its frame. But when it was over, nothing changed. Charles remained weak, paranoid, and obsessed. And still, night after night, he returned to the forbidden portrait. While the king unraveled, so, too did Spain. The treasury was nearly bankrupt. Armies went unpaid. Grain shortages led to famine. Peasants revolted in scattered provinces. Ministers fought bitterly for influence, each exploiting the king's weakness. Foreign diplomats mocked Madrid as a palace of ghosts. The forbidden painting became a symbol among courtiers. To them, it represented not just Charles, but Spain itself, a decayed body, collapsing from within. Worse still was the question of succession. Charles had no children. Despite 2 marriages, he remained impotent. His wives, Maria Luisa of Orléans and later Mariana of Neuburg, both wrote letters describing his frailty and despair. Maria Luisa once confided, "The king spends more time with his portrait than with his queen. His eyes are hollow, his body cold, and he believes himself damned." With no heir, Europe braced for war. France, Austria, and countless princes circled like vultures, waiting for Spain's empire to be divided. And through it all, Charles wasted away, retreating deeper into the shadows of his portrait. The final chapter of Charles II's life began not with a battle, not with betrayal, but with silence. By 1699, the King of Spain, ruler of one of the world's largest empires, was no longer truly ruling. He was a shadow moving through the vast marble halls of El Escorial and the Royal Alcazar of Madrid. His courtiers described him as a living corpse. His body was swollen with dropsy. His hair had fallen out. His teeth had rotted away. He could hardly walk without assistance, and he spoke less and less, his words garbled and broken. Even ambassadors, used to the dysfunction of royal courts, wrote with shock. The French envoy marveled at how the monarch of Spain, once feared across Europe, now looked more like a beggar than a king. A Venetian ambassador wrote, "His eyes are sunken, his skin the color of wax. He has no strength in his limbs, no blood in his veins. He is not a man, but the ruin of one." And yet, Charles remained king. Spain was falling apart, armies unpaid, colonies neglected, famine spreading. But all decisions, all decrees, still technically required his trembling hand. The empire was crumbling, and so was its monarch. The shadow of succession. By this point, the greatest question in Europe was not whether Charles would live, but what would happen when he died. Charles had been married twice, yet he had produced no children. His first wife, Maria Luisa of Orléans, died young, worn down by the stress of life with the sickly monarch. His second, Mariana of Neuburg, was younger and ambitious, but she too bore no heir. Whispers filled the court. Some said Charles was cursed by witchcraft, made infertile by demons. Others believed his wives had conspired against him, but doctors today know the truth. Centuries of inbreeding had left Charles genetically broken, sterile, and frail beyond repair. The lack of an heir created a crisis. Spain was still a vast empire, stretching from the Americas to the Philippines, from Naples to the Netherlands. Whoever inherited the throne would control one of the largest realms in history. France and Austria both maneuvered for control. The Bourbon dynasty of France, led by the powerful Louis XIV, claimed inheritance through Charles's mother. The Austrian Habsburgs, cousins of Charles, claimed it through bloodline. Each faction filled the Spanish court with spies, bribing ministers, and whispering into the king's ear. In truth, Charles was in no state to decide anything. But he was still the king, and as long as he breathed, Europe held its breath. The king's last days in the year 1700, Charles's health collapsed completely. He was racked with seizures. He could no longer digest food. His stomach rejected almost everything, leaving him emaciated. His vision blurred, his speech slurred. He was barely conscious for much of the day, yet, incredibly, he continued to fixate on the forbidden portrait. Servants reported that even in these final months, he demanded it be placed in his chambers. He would sit before it, pale hands shaking, eyes locked on the grotesque reflection. Some claimed he whispered to it, begging for answers. Others said he wept openly, as if the portrait mocked him with the truth of his broken body. On October 30th, 1700, Charles suffered a violent seizure that left him bedridden. Priests rushed to his side, fearing the end was near. He was given the last rites of the Catholic Church, but Charles lingered, clinging to life for several more agonizing days. On November 1st, 1700, All Saints' Day, Charles II of Spain finally died. He was 38 years old. The last monarch of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty was gone. The autopsy of a curse, what happened next, shocked even those who had long pitied his condition. An autopsy was performed, and the doctors who opened his body recoiled in horror. Their report, preserved in Spanish archives, reads like the dissection of a corpse that had never truly lived. His heart, they wrote, was the size of a peppercorn. His lungs were corroded. His intestines were rotten and blackened. His body was filled with water rather than blood. His head, when opened, was discovered to contain no brain, only water. One physician declared, "We have examined many corpses, but never one so ruined by nature." To the doctors and priests, it was proof that Charles had been cursed. To us, with modern knowledge, it is clear that Charles was the genetic victim of centuries of incest. His family had pursued power through marriage alliances so aggressively that they had destroyed themselves. Charles was not just a man, he was the living embodiment of dynastic collapse. The fate of the portrait. And what of the forbidden portrait? Here, history slips into shadow. After Charles's death, the painting was locked away. Some accounts claim it was burned by priests, who believed it carried the stain of evil. Others suggest it was hidden deep within the archives of Madrid, too disturbing to display. Legends grew around it. Some said the portrait had absorbed the king's soul, that it whispered in the dark halls of the palace long after his death. Others claimed that those who glimpsed it met sudden misfortune. No one knows for certain if the portrait still exists. Perhaps it was destroyed. Perhaps it lies rolled in some forgotten storeroom, waiting to be rediscovered. But its legacy remains. It represented the truth Charles could not escape. And in that sense, it was more powerful than any crown, any army, or any empire. The end of a dynasty, Charles left no heir. His death triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 18th century. France and Austria fought brutally over the remnants of the Spanish crown, dragging much of Europe into war. The once great empire of Spain became a pawn in foreign hands. The Habsburg line in Spain was dead. A new dynasty, the Bourbons, would take the throne. But they would inherit an empire weakened, fractured, and in decline. Charles's reign, which began with whispers of fragility, ended with the echo of collapse and, through it all, the forbidden painting remained, silent, haunting, a reminder of the truth that had driven a king to madness. When the story of Charles II comes to an end, it is tempting to view it as nothing more than a personal tragedy. A weak king, a cursed painting, a dynasty collapsing under its own arrogance. But look closer, and you'll see something far bigger, a warning written across the centuries. Because the forbidden portrait wasn't just about Charles, it was about monarchy itself, about the illusion of power, the lies of propaganda, and the brutal honesty of truth. For centuries, royal portraits were weapons. They were painted not to show the king or queen as they were, but as they wanted to be seen. In armor, commanding armies, in robes of gold, radiant with divine right, with skin smooth, eyes piercing, and posture unshakable. But Charles's portrait was different. It stripped away the myth. It showed the king as he really was, a frail, deformed man, undone by the sins of his ancestors. And that was terrifying, not only for him, but for the idea of monarchy itself. Imagine the courtiers who saw it. They lived in a palace where everything was theatre. The king was addressed as if he were God's chosen. His words, however slurred, were treated as law. His mere presence was meant to inspire awe. And yet, here was a canvas that told the truth. No awe, no power, only decay. The forbidden painting was more dangerous than any enemy army because it destroyed the illusion monarchy depended on. It whispered what nobody dared say aloud, that kings were not gods. They were flesh, and flesh rots. But the story cuts deeper. The obsession Charles had with the painting speaks to something profoundly human. He was a man born into unimaginable privilege. Castles, servants, treasures, empires. And yet none of it could protect him from the one thing he feared most: the mirror. Think of the nights he spent alone with it, everyone else asleep, the palace halls silent, and Charles sitting in a candlelit chamber, staring into his painted likeness. He wasn't just looking at art. He was confronting his own doom. The truth is, Charles had been raised in lies. As a child, priests told him he was chosen by God. Courtiers bowed and called him majestic. Portraits depicted him as strong, noble, divine. But when he looked at this forbidden image, the mask fell away. He saw the truth, that his bloodline had doomed him before he ever had a choice, and that truth drove him to madness. Because what is madness if not being forced to see what everyone else refuses to? In Charles's eyes, the painting wasn't just paint. It was prophecy. It was a window into a future he could not escape. No heirs, no dynasty, no strength, no salvation. Just decay. Just the end. And that is what makes this story more than history. It makes it a parable. Dynasties rise when they believe their own myths. They fall when reality breaks through. The Habsburgs thought they could cheat nature, that they could bend the laws of blood and inheritance to their will. But centuries of incest could not be disguised forever. Eventually, the truth was born in the body of Charles II, and the painting, brutally, mercilessly, showed it. We, today, might be tempted to laugh at the grotesque details: his swollen tongue, his jaw so large he could not chew, his body riddled with deformities, his reliance on exorcisms. But when you strip away the distance of history, what you see is a man trapped in a nightmare he never chose. Charles did not ask to be born king. He did not ask for his body to be broken before it even had a chance to grow. He did not ask to be made a symbol of power while being powerless himself. And so he stared at the only thing that told him the truth: his forbidden portrait. In many ways, Charles was the first monarch of modern Europe to confront a brutal reality, one that all rulers eventually face: that power is performance, that crowns are costumes, and that the body beneath is frail.